I'm Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report. Markets, finance, and scandals. I was thinking, what is your peak America moment? For me, it was 1969 and the moon landing. What is your peak America moment? The moment America peaked, now that it's basically in fatal decline. Send me your peak America moment at Keiser Report at rttv.ru. Now let's get into today's shocking scandal news. Stacy Herbert, talk to me.
Max, the first very scandalous, or at least shocking headline. Even illegal immigrants are giving up on the U.S. economy. Apparently, the average annual inflow of illegal immigrants has tumbled to 150,000 in 2009 from 425,000 in 2000. So, Max, you said many times that fence being built along the border was in order to keep Americans from going down to Mexico.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I've got kind of a revised thought about the wall being put up between Mexico and America. You know, you got to think of it in terms of the Berlin Wall. Remember, we had East Germany and West Germany. Now you've got this new wall in between Mexico, what is now southern Mexico, and what is now becoming northern Mexico. So everything above the wall, the 48 contiguous states, formerly known as the United States of America, that'll be forever now known as North Mexico. So you've got Mexico, South Mexico, North Mexico, and then Canada.
Well, apparently exits have outnumbered entries into the U.S., or North Mexico, as you call it.
North Mexico, yes.
Since 2007. So more and more Mexicans are returning to Mexico because their economy is actually still growing. So let's look at how bad it is in the U.S. Toyota, GM, Ford sales slump as buyers stay home. Yes, as the Mexicans are returning back, exiting, those left behind, those staying home, are unable to buy cars. Apparently, GM said deliveries of new automobiles has fallen by 25% since last August. Toyota reported a 34% drop.
Yeah, well, remember, the government took over General Motors under Barack Obama, and now they're being recapitalized and they're being refloated on the exchange, and all those shares will end up in pension accounts, of course, and just in time for the General Motors car market to take a huge nosedive again. So this will be another Obama tragedy right there with health care, Wall Street non-reform, and General Motors catastrophe. Thanks, Obama. You're batting 1,000 losers.
Actually, you mentioned the Berlin Wall and the East-West Germany divide. I was thinking perhaps if the Trabant, the Trubby, was introduced back into America, perhaps Americans could afford these and then sell instead the Toyotas and the GMs and the Fords to the Mexicans.
Yeah, the Trabants, they were very famous in Eastern Germany.
Yes.
They should bring those back into North Mexico, formerly the United States. You know, we'd have to give them a big masculine oomph somehow. You know, on truck stops all across America, they sell what are called truck nuts. These are little appendages that you screw onto the chassis of your car. Put up some images of this. This is not something I'm making up on the spot. This is for real. You see this? You put that on these East German Trabant cars and give it an American masculinity.
Well, the thing about the Trubby, which made me think that it would be perfect for America, of why Americans have to resort to driving these cheap cars made partly of cotton and fabric. So Americans might be picking cotton again, you know, jump down, turn around. It says, since the engine does not have an oil injection system, two-stroke oil has to be added to the 24-liter fuel tank every time the car was filled up, at a 50-to-1 or a 33-to-1 ratio of fuel to oil. And those numbers kind of remind me of like when the collapse of Lehman Brothers happened. They were leveraged at 33-to-1. I think Goldman Sachs got up to 50-to-1 at one point. So these could be numbers that forever are ingrained and symbolize the new America. What happened to America? The leverage that destroyed it, and now we're driving American Trubbies.
And also, you point out that they were made in part of cotton.
Yes.
Well, so is the U.S. dollar. So why not make these cars out of old recycled U.S. dollars? Because clearly they're becoming more worthless every single second of every single day.
Another way I have of possibly saving Americans more money, making their lives easier with no jobs.
That's what we're really concerned about this, too. We want to make the lives of the American easier. Yes, tell us more.
Japan resort draws men with virtual girlfriends. Yes, a new resort has opened in Japan where men can go and cavort with virtual avatar girlfriends. So they just take a bunch of pictures of themselves with this avatar near the sea. But I thought this could be a good way. You know, in America, what happened from the 1971, when we went off the gold standard, a lot of Americans needed to get two incomes for the family. So the family broke apart and all this stuff. But why not just get a virtual family? Then you only have a one-income household. You've got your virtual kids, your virtual dog, your virtual cat, your virtual wife.
Right, it brings new meaning to the concept of artificial insemination, doesn't it?
Okay, Max. Well, but speaking of third world America, when any country descends into third world status, a crucial ingredient of this is massive corruption. So I want to look at the corruption and as I was saying, the leverage and the bankers that brought America to this state. Hedge fund managers' secret insider trading code. How's the weather in healthcare? So a former hedge fund manager has basically been settled with the SEC for insider trading on a Merck deal. Merck Pharmaceuticals bought a flu vaccine company. And one of his friends was doing the due diligence for Merck and gave him the information about what the price would be by saying the weather was in the 50s. So this guy, this hedge fund manager, Stephen Goldfield, just settled with the SEC. He made a $14 million gain on his illegal trading, and he paid a fine of $600,000 without having to admit any guilt or anything like that.
Let me explain something here. Okay, this is all about neoliberal economics, Milton Friedman-esque Chicago School economics, trickle-down economics, keeping interest rates artificially low for year after year after year, fueling speculative bubbles after speculative bubbles. The real economy shrinks. Jobs have now been exported away. GDP is in decline. Deflation grips the American economy. Trickle-down theory was a hoax, and all you have are these speculative bubbles. But now that the bubbles have burst, you still need liquidity in the system, and that liquidity is coming from fraud. Pure financial fraud is the number one component of the American economy today. It's like that old Woody Allen joke. He said, "Doctor, my brother thinks he's a chicken." The doctor says, "Here, give him these pills." And the guy says, "No, you don't understand. We need the eggs." In other words, American economy is now pure fraud. But the cure for this pure fraud would mean that there is no liquidity at all in the system, eggs, and the entire economy would come to a screeching, grinding halt immediately. That's not going to happen because Bernanke and Geithner and Obama are as corrupt as any financial corrupt people I've ever seen on Wall Street, including Ivan Boesky, who's one of the most corrupt in history. These guys are the absolute most corrupt.
Well, you were talking about fraud in the system, and we've often talked about fraud is the system. That is all there is in America, and no place epitomizes that more than the Dow Jones. Well, we know that, 70% of all trades is high-frequency trading. This is in the news. SEC probes canceled trades. So regulators are scrutinizing what some in the stock market are calling quote stuffing, trading which unusually large numbers of orders to buy or sell stocks are placed in a fraction of a second only to be canceled almost immediately. Well, Max, the practice is also known as sub-penny pricing, and the Wall Street Journal describes that as this. In the sub-penny pricing method, the orders are priced in increments as small as 1/10 of a cent and far away from the actual price at which a stock is trading.
There you go. Let me explain what's going on here. Usually, the way prices occur on the exchange during what's called the price discovery mechanism is that you've got buyers and sellers. They meet anonymously in the Adam Smith-like invisible hand of the market, and a clearing price occurs, and both are mutually satisfied, both the buyer and the seller. The result, the exhaust of that interaction, is the current price, which is constantly changing as more buyers and more sellers interact on the market. What you're describing is that big banks on Wall Street, like J.P. Morgan, Goldman Sachs, and all the gang down on Wall Street, they pick a price first. Then they flood the exchange with orders, what is being referred to as quote stuffing, forcing that price mechanism to go toward the price that they've pre-selected. Now that's price fixing, that's command and control economics, which we've seen in other economies and other eras. It didn't work. It's a repudiation of free market capitalism. It's a repudiation of all that anyone in America holds sacred. It is absolute financial, undiluted, unquestionable tyranny. These quote stuffers, if the founding fathers of America were around today, okay, you know what would happen to these quote stuffers. You know, I know, you know, okay? It wouldn't be pretty. It would involve a very heavy, very sharp object, and I'll let you fill in the blanks from there. But this is outrageous. These people who are engaged in this are literally holding America down on the ground with a big fat boot on its neck, and they're knifing it in the face over and over again, and it's bleeding to death, and they don't care. And that's outrageous, and most Americans are asleep at the switch. Bah, bah, bunch of worthless sheep. I'm sick of them all. What else you got?
Well, finally, Max, a quick headline here, because nothing drove America into the ground like the neocon war tied with the neocon bankers. And the front man for the entire war, I don't believe the Iraq invasion would not have happened without Tony Blair, because George Bush in the United States was unable to articulate the argument. Tony Blair went up there with his evangelical fervor and sold it to people who wanted to kill people. Blair's memoirs, From Number 10 to Number 1, Tony Blair's account of his time in Downing Street became the fastest-selling autobiography of all time after shifting hundreds of thousands of copies in his first 24 hours. And in the book, he's pushing for war in Iran. He's saying we have to start bombing Iran soon. So more of the same. Those Trubbies are looking good here. A good buy, I would say.
Well, we'll follow up on the Tony Blair biography in a subsequent show. We've got plenty in store for you, Tony, so stay tuned. But that's all the time we have right now, Stacy Herbert. Thanks for checking in on the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
Now, don't go away. When we come back, much more.
Hungry for the full story? We've got it firsthand. The biggest issues get a human voice, face to face with the newsmakers on RT.
Welcome back to the Keiser Report. Time for a real treat. We're going to go to Kabul, Afghanistan, and talk with citizen journalist Mark Francesca Rondiro, also known as Bicycle Mark. Mark runs the website citizenjournalist.com. His work appears on The Guardian's website, and right now he's in Kabul to help with the elections. Mark, welcome to the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max. Pleasure to be here.
All right. Mark, tell us about Kabul. What exactly are you doing there?
I'm here in Kabul helping to train elections observers because on the 18th of September, there will be elections here in Kabul, or at least in theory, there will be elections if all goes according to plan. And my role here is of a technical nature, as sort of my experience as a citizen journalist has led to the fact that I know how to use a lot of different online tools. And all I can really say, without violating any, agreements, is that elections observers are trying to use some more modern tools for reporting from where they are. So basically, I'm training them before they go out in how to use a lot of, it involves mobile phones. And we have a whole system that takes what you observe at the polling place and puts it into a nice visual, interactive map on a website that can be private or public. So my good friends, which I work with, have developed this, and I'm helping to explain it.
All right, so tell us a little bit about the people that you're actually interacting with there on the ground to facilitate these elections?
During the day, when I'm, I guess, officially doing a job, I'm interacting with, I have to say, mostly Americans. As you can imagine, being this is almost a state of the United States in some ways. So you run into a lot of Americans, not on the street, of course. They would never be found on the street. But yes, inside buildings, very fortified buildings. So during the day, I'm often in a very fortified building, impressively fortified. I know prisons with less security. And I interact with a lot of Americans, a few Brits, several Afghans who provide translation services and other expertise, and a few Australians, lots of English-speaking people. And they are experienced in the world of either journalism or elections observing or running some kind of elections observing process, because I actually don't hang out with the observers. So in a way, Afghanistan is a place where I've come and I've never worked so hard as I've had to work here. Maybe it's because people don't know what else to do with themselves. If they do have a job, they just work all the time.
All right, so tell us a little bit about how far advanced the Internet is in Afghanistan. Now, going back a year or so during the previous Iranian elections, of course, we saw a huge use of Twitter became a factor. But is this a possibility in Afghanistan at this point that these social media Internet sites could be a factor? Or what is the state of the Internet in Afghanistan now?
No, I just want to say you could never have what you had in Iran for one basic reason: education. The more time I spend in Afghanistan, and I've spent a very limited time, I'm now 1 week in, I do know that, and I see evidence that this audience is not, this public, I should say, is not highly educated. We're doing some projects that involve SMSing Afghans, and even responding to an SMS, the telecom companies are telling us only a small percentage, you'd have to be young, would actually respond to an SMS. Most people don't know how to SMS. They have mobile phones, sure, everybody has a mobile phone, but typing and writing words, not being done. So this goes, when you take it to the Internet, is a problem because people are not into the writing or reading of language. That is not to take away from the fact that there are educated people in this city and in this country. There's a university. I've met students. I've met people who studied there. But what I meet more often are Afghans who studied outside, in Canada, in the United States, in India. A lot of Afghans who have studied in India and come back. And these guys have the jobs. These guys have, these guys are using their mobile phones. They have smartphones. Interestingly, I was in a taxi today, and the taxi driver had an iPhone. And the taxi driver is the most simple guy ever, but he had the first-generation iPhone. He seemed very hip. All
right, so let me ask you this. How do Afghanis then get their information informing them which way to vote? Is it through what medium?
I think it's radio. I think it's TV. I know TV is pretty important here. There are newspapers. I see them laying around because I'm hanging out with educated Afghans who read newspapers and read books. When I walk around or when I drive around, I rarely see or a bookshop. I think I've never seen a bookshop. I've seen books for sale like secondhand on the street, or I've never seen a newspaper stand. I think it's mostly just radio and TV, and internet is only amongst young people who have some, either income or just happen to have internet at home.
Okay, so what are the issues now coming up with this election? Who are the leading candidates, the incumbent? What are the chances of Karzai continuing? I guess he's standing for re-election. So give us some dynamics in terms of what we can expect with this election coming up. Who's running? What are the issues?
It's amazing. Just talking about this, I think I'm risking my life, but that's okay. I don't mind. There are so many candidates, I couldn't possibly tell you what is going to happen. First of all, it's parliamentary elections, so Karzai himself is not involved. He was amazingly reelected last year, and then the runoff was canceled. Very shocking. He does support certain candidates. I don't know who they are. I am amazed at the amount of candidates, and their posters are everywhere. I think that the Election Commission is actually having trouble managing all of these candidates, because what I noticed is in this country, or at least in this city, it's not about parties, maybe because there's not a strong tradition of parties. It's about individuals. So there are so many just individuals making a run at Parliament that it's just a really large list of people, which is probably going to be a nightmare for the count. The real issue right now is, first of all, whether there should be an election. There are 900 polling stations in this country. I think we call them polling stations or polling centers that have been closed and declared not going to be used. So why? Because of security. So that means that in a large chunk of the country, you can't vote because it's not safe. So they just decided to give up even having that option. It's too risky. A lot of people are saying rather not have elections. Well, it's mixed. If you don't have elections, then you can say, well, this is a corrupt country, and look, they didn't have elections. If you do have elections and violence occurs, which is expected, then you'll say, well, look what elections did. I know that there's a lot of divisions, and the divisions between parties can be violent. That's what I'm told over and over again. I was going to say I don't see it, but the truth is, in the morning for the last few days, every time we get to hear the press briefings from an Afghan gentleman, and he always has a story about some candidates or campaign workers being killed in some province of the country. So it's a bad situation. It's hard to say, that what's going to happen. Karzai is a very powerful force in this country. So whatever happens, he'll remain firmly in power.
Well, what percentage does religion play in this upcoming election?
The country is quite religious. We're now in Ramadan, and I find almost nobody that isn't fasting, or at least admits that they're not fasting. I hear the call to prayer, and I see the street clear.
My question is that if I'm an Afghani and I go to the poll, am I going to be thinking the candidate that I'm voting for, he's more in tune with my religious beliefs, or I'm voting for him or her, presumably they're all male, because he's closer attuned to my political beliefs? What is the dominant theme there?
It's tribal. It's groups that I don't even know how to describe because I'm not educated enough in Afghan history and present. It's not about religion, though. That's one thing I've learned. It's about the subdivisions of groups throughout the country. These provinces are so diverse and so different one from the other that even people in Kabul wouldn't be welcome in certain provinces in this country, which is no wonder why the what is called the war, or whatever we call it these days, is dragging on and so complicated, and the U.S. military is all over the place, and NATO. It's not religious. It's a tribal thing. It's a groups thing, and about women, that's an interesting topic. I don't know total how many women are running for parliament. I think it's something around 4, maybe 6, maybe it's more, but I do know that the women and people who work for them are targets. And recently, I think the staff of one of the women candidates in I don't know what province was killed like 2 days ago in just an attack, a terrorist attack. And it's amazing to me. I still see posters for some women, and I think it is so dangerous and admirable what they're doing, running for parliament, because so many people in this country are willing, or enough people are willing to go and attack this person and destroy them.
All right, so the way you describe it, Mark, and you're on the ground, you're in Kabul, you're an election observer to some degree, or facilitator, but it sounds like from what you're saying that there is no real election as that term is understood to, let's say, an American ear. So is it just a talking point for Obama to say there are quote unquote elections in Afghanistan to give a patina of normalcy to what is essentially a chaotic tribal chaotic situation? Is it really just a PR stunt, is what I'm asking?
I actually don't think it's a PR stunt necessarily. In the U.S., it might be a PR stunt, for him, but here, I'll tell you what an observer said to me, or someone who's in charge of observers. He said the problem with all this is that people are going to look at these elections and they're going to say, oh, those polling stations aren't even going to open. Oh, this region of the country isn't even under the control of the government yet. All these people are afraid to run or go vote. This is not a free and fair election. Good point. But what he said to me was, the hard part is we're using Western standards of what is a successful election. And what he seemed to be saying to me is, look, we need to lower the bar a bit and say, for the conditions and for the history and for the current situation here, maybe some kind of elections are still a pretty good thing. I don't know if you understand what I'm saying, but what he's saying is, don't take your Western standards of what a good election is and bring it here and say it has to be this way, because we just can't do it right now. But maybe we can do something, and maybe we can be happy about some form of an election for now. Of course, Obama isn't saying that, right? He just calls it an election and a victory. That's, of course, simplifying it greatly. But I still would give them credit if they had an election and there wasn't violence afterwards. The problem right now is that it seems like it's a no-win situation. If you have elections, people are going to get hurt. If you don't have elections, well, people will probably still get hurt, and people will feel quite, I think, angry at not being represented or, not being in a democracy.
Well, it kind of reminds me of the history of the American Indian made many treaties with the U.S. military. Of course, the treaties meant nothing, but it did give some talking points for the subsequent elections for the political powers to point to some documentation, even though it was worthless. All right, so Bicycle Mark, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
My pleasure.
All righty, and that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with Max Keiser and Stacy Herbert. And I want to thank my guest from Kabul, Bicycle Mark. And if you want to send me an email, please do so at keiserreport@rttv.ru. Until next time, this is Max Keiser saying bye, y'all.